Welcome to my channel. The countryside stretched endlessly around Elena, a patchwork of rolling hills and dense forests that seemed to swallow the horizon whole. The isolation of her home had once felt like a sanctuary, a quiet escape from the noise of the world. But now, as she stood on the porch, the silence pressed against her chest like a weight. Marcus had been gone for 3 weeks, and the house felt emptier with each passing day. Elena sighed, her breath visible in the crisp morning air. She wrapped her arms around herself, the thin fabric of her sweater offering little warmth. Marcus's absence was nothing new. His job as a traveling salesman often took him away for weeks at a time, but this time felt different. The loneliness had settled deeper, gnawing at her in a way she couldn't ignore. She missed the sound of his voice, the way he would laugh at his own jokes, even the way he left his socks scattered across the floor. Her gaze drifted to the stables at the edge of the property. Aries, the black stallion Marcus had bought for her last year, stood in the paddock, his coat gleaming in the pale sunlight. The horse had been a gift, a way for Marcus to ease her loneliness while he was away. At first, Elena had been indifferent to the animal, seeing it as little more than a responsibility. But over time, Aries had become a quiet presence in her life, a companion in the absence of her husband. Elena stepped off the porch and made her way to the stables, her boots crunching against the gravel path. Aries lifted his head as she approached, his dark eyes watching her with a calm intelligence. She reached out to stroke his neck, her fingers brushing against the soft, warm fur. "Good morning, boy," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Aries snorted softly, as if in response, and Elena felt a small smile tug at her lips. The stables were her refuge, a place where she could escape the oppressive silence of the house. She spent hours here, grooming Aries, cleaning the stalls, or simply sitting in the hayloft, lost in thought. It was here, in the quiet company of the horse, that she felt the least alone. But lately something had shifted. Elena couldn't quite put it into words, but her feelings for Aries had begun to change. It wasn't just companionship she sought from him anymore. It was something deeper, something she couldn't bring herself to name. The sound of the phone ringing from the house jolted her from her thoughts. Elena hesitated, her hand lingering on Aries's neck, before reluctantly pulling away. She hurried back to the house, her heart pounding with a mix of hope and dread. Maybe it was Marcus, calling to say he was coming home. She grabbed the phone on the 4th ring, her voice breathless. "Hello, Elena, it's me." Marcus's voice was distant, crackling over the line. "Marcus," she said, her relief palpable. "How are you? When are you coming home?" There was a pause on the other end, and Elena's stomach tightened. "I'm sorry, Elena. I've been asked to extend the trip. There's a big client here, and I can't walk away from this opportunity." Elena's heart sank. "How much longer?" "Another 2 weeks, maybe 3. I'll make it up to you, I promise." She wanted to scream, to tell him that she didn't care about the clients or the money, that she just wanted him home. But she bit her tongue, forcing herself to stay calm. "Okay," she said quietly. "Just be safe." "I will. I love you." "I love you too," she whispered, but the line had already gone dead. Elena stood there for a long moment, the phone still pressed to her ear, before slowly lowering it. The silence of the house closed in around her, heavier than before. She felt a tear slip down her cheek and quickly wiped it away, angry at herself for crying. She turned and walked back to the stables, her steps slow and deliberate. Aries was still in the paddock, his head turned toward her as if he had been waiting. Elena climbed over the fence and approached him, her hand trembling as she reached out to touch him. "I don't know what to do," she whispered, her voice breaking. Aries stood still, his warm breath brushing against her skin. In that moment, he felt like the only thing holding her together. The storm came that night, the sky splitting open with thunder and rain. Elena lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The sound of the wind howling outside only deepened her sense of isolation. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. She grabbed a blanket and made her way to the stables, seeking solace in the one place that felt safe. Aries was in his stall, his ears twitching at the sound of her footsteps. Elena climbed into the hayloft, wrapping the blanket around herself as she settled into the straw. The sound of the rain on the roof was soothing, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of peace. As she drifted off to sleep, her thoughts lingered on Aries, his presence a quiet comfort in the storm. But deep down, she knew something had changed. The line between companionship and something more had begun to blur, and she wasn't sure she could, or wanted to, stop it. The days blurred together in a haze of routine and longing. Elena woke each morning to the same silence, the same emptiness that seemed to stretch endlessly before her. But now, her thoughts were no longer consumed solely by Marcus's absence. Aries had become a constant presence in her mind, his dark eyes and quiet strength a source of comfort she couldn't ignore. She spent more time in the stables than ever before, her hands busy with the tasks of caring for the horse. She brushed his coat until it gleamed, cleaned his hooves with meticulous care, and whispered to him as if he could understand every word. It was during these moments that she felt the most alive, the most connected to something or someone outside herself. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the paddock, Elena decided to take Aries for a ride. She saddled him with practiced ease, her fingers trembling slightly as she tightened the straps. There was a nervous energy in the air, a tension she couldn't quite name. She led Aries to the edge of the property, where the forest began. The trees stood tall and silent, their leaves rustling softly in the breeze. Elena hesitated for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest, before swinging herself onto Aries's back. The moment her feet settled into the stirrups, something shifted. Aries seemed to sense her unease, his muscles tensing beneath her. Elena leaned forward, her hands gripping the reins, and whispered, "Let's go, boy." Aries surged forward, his powerful legs carrying them into the forest. The wind whipped through Elena's hair, and she felt a thrill of exhilaration she hadn't felt in years. The world around her became a blur of green and gold, the rhythmic pounding of Aries's hooves echoing in her ears. For the first time in months, Elena felt free. The weight of her loneliness, the ache of Marcus's absence, all of it melted away as she and Aries moved as one. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sensation wash over her, and when she opened them again, she felt a surge of emotion so intense it took her breath away. They rode for what felt like hours, the forest giving way to open fields bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. Finally, Elena brought Aries to a stop at the edge of a small pond, its surface shimmering like liquid gold. She dismounted, her legs trembling slightly, and led Aries to the water's edge. As the horse drank, Elena sat on the grass, her arms wrapped around her knees. She watched him, her heart swelling with a mixture of affection and something deeper, something she couldn't quite define. It wasn't just gratitude for his companionship anymore. It was a connection that went beyond words, beyond reason. "You're the only one who understands," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the sound of the water. Aries lifted his head, his dark eyes meeting hers, and for a moment, it felt as if he truly did. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in shades of twilight, Elena's thoughts turned to Marcus. Guilt crept in, a cold, unwelcome presence that soured the warmth she had felt moments before. She loved her husband, didn't she? How could she feel this way about Aries, about a horse? The questions swirled in her mind, unanswered and unanswerable. She knew her feelings were wrong, that they defied every norm and expectation. But the more she tried to push them away, the stronger they became. That night, as she lay in bed, the image of Aries's eyes haunted her. She tossed and turned, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Finally, she gave up on sleep and returned to the stables, seeking the only comfort she knew. Aries was awake, his ears twitching as she approached. Elena climbed into the hayloft, her body sinking into the soft straw. She lay there, staring at the rafters, her thoughts a tangled mess. "What's wrong with me?" she whispered, her voice breaking. Aries shifted in his stall below, the sound of his hooves against the ground a quiet reassurance. Elena closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. She felt torn, caught between her loyalty to Marcus and the inexplicable bond she had formed with Ares. The line between right and wrong had blurred, and she wasn't sure she could find her way back. As the first light of dawn crept into the stables, Elena made a decision. She would try to distance herself from Ares, to focus on her marriage and the life she had built with Marcus. But even as the thought crossed her mind, she knew it would be easier said than done. The sound of tires crunching on gravel pulled Elena from her restless sleep. She sat up in the hayloft, her heart pounding as she peered through the slats of the stable walls. Marcus's car was parked in the driveway, its headlights cutting through the early morning mist. He was home. Elena's stomach churned with a mixture of relief and dread. She had been waiting for this moment, dreading it, and now that it was here, she felt utterly unprepared. She climbed down from the hayloft, her legs stiff from sleeping on the hard surface, and brushed the straw from her clothes. Ares watched her from his stall. His dark eyes filled with a quiet understanding that only deepened her guilt. She took a deep breath and stepped out of the stables, the cool morning air biting at her skin. Marcus was already out of the car, his suitcase in hand, his face lighting up when he saw her. "Elena," he called, his voice warm and familiar. She forced a smile and walked toward him, her steps slow and deliberate. "Welcome home," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus dropped his suitcase and pulled her into a tight embrace. Elena stiffened for a moment before relaxing into his arms, the scent of his cologne filling her nostrils. It was a scent she had missed, but now it felt foreign, as if it belonged to someone she no longer knew. "I missed you," Marcus said, his voice muffled against her hair. "I missed you too," Elena replied, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. They walked into the house together, the silence between them heavy with unspoken words. Marcus chatted about his trip, about the clients he had met and the deals he had closed, but Elena barely heard him. Her mind was elsewhere, back in the stables with Ares, where she had found solace in the midst of her loneliness. Over the next few days, Elena tried to rekindle the connection she had once shared with Marcus. She cooked his favorite meals, asked about his work, and even suggested they take a walk together through the countryside. But no matter what she did, the distance between them remained, a chasm she couldn't bridge. Marcus noticed her preoccupation, though he didn't say anything at first. But one evening, as they sat by the fire, the tension between them finally boiled over. "Is something wrong, Elena?" he asked, his voice gentle but probing. She looked up from the book she had been pretending to read, her heart racing. "What do you mean? You've been distant ever since I got back. I just want to make sure you're okay." Elena hesitated, her mind racing. She wanted to tell him the truth, to confess the turmoil that had been consuming her, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead she said, "I'm fine. Just tired, I guess." Marcus studied her for a moment, his brow furrowed. "If there's something bothering you, you can tell me. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out together." Elena's eyes filled with tears, and she quickly looked away. "I know," she whispered. The next morning, Elena woke early and made her way to the stables. Ares was waiting for her, his ears twitching as she approached. She leaned against the stall door, her heart heavy with guilt and longing. "I don't know what to do," she whispered, her voice breaking. Ares nuzzled her hand, his warm breath brushing against her skin. The sound of footsteps behind her made her turn. Marcus stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Elena," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We need to talk." She nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. They walked out to the paddock, the morning sun casting long shadows across the ground. Marcus stopped and turned to her, his eyes searching hers. "What's going on?" he asked. "And don't tell me it's nothing. I know you too well for that." Elena took a deep breath, her hands trembling at her sides. "I've been struggling," she admitted. "While you were gone, I felt so alone. And Ares, He was the only one who was there for me. Marcus frowned. What are you saying? Tears streamed down Elena's cheeks as she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. I started to feel something for him, Marcus. Something I can't explain. I know it's wrong, but I couldn't help it. Marcus stared at her, his expression a mixture of shock and disbelief. For a long moment he said nothing, the silence between them heavy with tension. Finally, he sighed and ran a hand through his hair. Elena, I don't even know what to say. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice breaking. I never meant for this to happen. Marcus took a step toward her, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and determination. We'll figure this out, he said. Together. Elena nodded, though she wasn't sure she believed him. The guilt and shame she felt were overwhelming, but so was the love she still had for Marcus.